Hi and welcome back to part 2 of this kitchen equipment series. In this video I'm going to cover the equipment that you'll need to start thinking about as your kitchen skills begin to grow. This information builds on part 1, so if you haven't seen that clip yet, I suggest you take a look before going any further. Now usually as cooking skills develop or you're able to start branching out into the world of cooking for a living, there's a few more pieces of kit that you might want to consider investing in. Now, it's not all essential, but what you'll find is that a small investment here and there will buy you back time in the kitchen and make your life a lot easier. Okay, so it's definitely something to think about. Having the right equipment and also it can also increase the quality of the food that you're able to serve and overall just generally improve and lift the level that you're operating at as a cook. So I'll run through a few pieces of the smaller equipment first before getting into the larger and the more expensive machines that you might want to be thinking about. Okay, if you're watching this video because you've signed up for our 10-day foundation course, the majority of this stuff is really kind of ideal to have, unless I've listed it as not essential. However, I do think it's worth begging, borrowing or stealing anything that you aren't ready to buy for the purpose of doing that course and just test it out first. So let's get into it. Some of it's really quite basic and non-expensive stuff. Things like butcher string, okay, great for trussing up and tying up meat to help it cook nice and evenly. Just make sure it's not plastic, okay, so that it can handle the heat of the oven. These little plastic squeezy bottles are great. They're great for storing and presenting sauces and coulis and things like that. You can get bigger ones as well. They don't cost very much, €1 or 2 each, and really make life a lot easier. Another thing that I use a lot of is latex gloves. Okay, they're a godsend for anything messy or anything really smelly, or even actually most of the time I use them for serving food when I'm plating up dishes because it helps with the heat. You're able to get much more sort of involved with the food as you're plating up without burning yourself. Okay, so they're a great investment. Loose bottom tartan. Okay, the base comes out for making tarts and things like that. They're great because you can get the tart out without crushing the shell. Okay, and there's things like Dario molds and ramekins. Okay, now my preference is a metal Dario mold. They're nice thin metal so that when you put a panna cotta or something that you're going to turn out, you can just drop it into a little bit of hot water very quickly. The heat transfers quickly and the little dessert will just pop right out. Okay, however, you can't really serve one of these sorts of things to a table. Okay, so and that's when you really need a ceramic or a glass ramekin. Okay, for things like souffles or chocolate fondants where the actual ramekin is going to the table. You can make a panna cotta in this. It just takes a lot longer to get the heat through it from the water to turn it out. Okay, blowtorch, mostly for caramelizing sugar. Okay, on things like lemon tarts or creme brulees and things like that. You can't successfully caramelize a creme brulee without one. Okay, trying to do them in the oven, it's just never hot enough. Okay, and I also recommend that you get the plumber's blowtorch or a reasonably solid one that clips onto the top of the butane tin itself, instead of those refillable ones from the kitchen shop. Okay, they're so gutless, they take so long to get the job done that your guest will have probably be ready to leave by the time you've blowtorched a dozen brulees. Okay, so if you're buying a new one, then aim for one that goes straight on the gas canister. Piping bags or disposable piping bags are great for serving things like mashed potato, etc. But mostly they're used for piping baked goods, things like raw macaroon mix and eclairs and mousses and things like that. Okay, personally I always have the plastic ones. Okay, because aside from just being a bit more convenient, they're also a lot more hygienic. Okay, the cloth ones that you can buy, you never really get them clean, or more importantly, you never really get them completely dried out. So that's why they're a little bit less hygienic. Okay, now baking parchment. is great for lining tins, and it's a good idea to leave the cheap stuff on the shelf. Okay, if you're buying parchment, get a decent one with a good coating so it doesn't stick to the tin. Cake tins and etc. If you only need it to be a flat sheet, then this one's pretty well used one. But these silicone mats are really good. They're 10, at most maybe 15 euros each, but you can use them over and over again, so they're really money well spent. And they're also better for making things like tuiles or dehydrating than using paper, because the paper tends to sort of crinkle up and get a bit soggy. For macaroons, these are really ideal. Then there's things like ring cutters. These ring cutters as a set make a great job, or these melon ballers. Okay, these are small things that make a great job to the presentation of your food, but they're not essential. Things like cutting out fondants and interesting little vegetable creations. Not something you need, but again, just something that makes a little bit of a difference. Now, sugar thermometer. This is a sugar or a jam thermometer, and again, you need one of these for making things like pate, for anything that requires boiled sugar, Italian meringue and pate à bombe and things like that. Okay, you could also use a digital thermometer, but it needs to go up to ideally it needs to go up to sort of a good 200 degrees, and then it's good for checking the temperature of your frying oil and things like that. You can also use these then for checking the internal temperature of meat while it's cooking, but to be honest, I like to not put too much emphasis on checking meat like that, because I think as you're learning to cook, it's quite a good idea to get a feel for what cooked meat feels like without having to check it every time with the probe, just so you know how to do it. Okay. Lemon juicer, not really essential, but after you've juiced your first 10 lemons for a lemon tart, you'll probably be happy to run out and spend 1 or 2 euros on a lemon juicer, you know. However, that said, something that is really vital, in my opinion, is either a pair of fish tweezers or a sprung-loaded pair of pliers for taking the pin bones out of fish. If you're going to be filleting lots of fish, then it's worth having a pair for a few euros. If the fish is as fresh as it should be that you're using, it's a nightmare to pull those bones out if you haven't got something to grip them properly. And last, the small utensils that I think is a great thing to have is either a nicely shaped ice cream scoop like this, or an old silver spoon for quenelling, a quenelling spoon. Okay, these are fantastic, and the best ones are the old silver ones that you find with a really nice, deep, rounded, smooth shape to the blade. Okay, the old silver ones, that's what you want. They're quite hard to track down these days, and they're always getting stolen. All right, so raise your grandmother's drawer and keep an eye on them. Don't let them out of your sight. Right, now this is where it becomes expensive, okay? And if you're just learning to cook or taking our course, you might want to consider borrowing some of this gear first before you shell out for it, okay? It's very easy to think that you need all of these expensive machines, and then you actually go to use them and find that you don't actually use it as much as you thought. And there's a few different types of mixers and blenders you can get for the kitchen. It's really important to understand how they differ, because none of them will do it all. Okay, so this Magimix, this is a food processor. Okay, it'll chop items like meat and for pates and fish for fish cakes and pasta dough, and it's really great for making pastry. I've got to say, probably the only thing I really use mine for is making pastry, and I could do that. You can do it by hand. Although the manufacturers will disagree, you can't really use this machine for making bread doughs, and it will blend the soup, but it won't be really super silky and fine. It'll blend it, but it'll still be a little bit coarse. Okay. If you want to make a vegetable puree or a silky smooth soup, then you need a high-speed blender like a NutriBullet or one of these two that I've got here. Okay. This one's for larger quantities, larger quantities of soups and sauces and things like that. And these kind of blenders cost from between 50 to 100, 150 euros at the cheaper end of things, or if you go up to a Vitamix, the quality brand, they're around 500 or 600. Okay, they're super high quality and virtually indestructible. However, for the average cook, you could replace one of those blenders with something like this 7 or 8 times for the same money. So unless you've got money to burn and want to have the best kit you can get, then I'd probably leave it for the restaurant kitchens. Now this small blender is called a Premier Super G, and it's my choice when it comes to blenders. It's virtually indestructible. It comes with, I've only got 2 here, but it comes with 3 different size bowls, which are great if you want to blend something small. Okay, you want to blend something small like a pesto or a small amount of coulis or gel, and that's virtually impossible in a bigger blender like this. Okay, now strictly speaking, they're sold as spice grinders. Okay, so this small bowl is for grinding dry spices, which is great because it saves wasting hours with a mortar and pestle. The 2 larger bowls, these 2, are designed for making wet curry paste. Okay, but they make perfectly silky smooth soups and vegetable purees and all of those sorts of things. If I'm making a vegetable puree for 50 guests for dinner, I use maybe two or three batches through this, and it's perfect. Now, there's one thing I should point out about these blenders is that there's no automatic cut off if you take the lid off. Okay, so if you take the lid off, the blender will still keep running, and most blenders aren't allowed to do that anymore, but I think that these guys are made in India and they haven't really caught up with that safety feature yet. Another common machine in the kitchen is a KitchenAid or a Kenwood. Okay, this one is a Kenwood and it's a mixer. Okay, you only really need to invest in one of these mixers if you're making a lot of bread, in my opinion. If so, that's great. Okay, because you put the ingredients in the bowl, you put the dough hook in, and then you leave them to do their thing. So they save you hours and loads of strain on your wrist as well. Okay, they're great if you're making things like meringue and whipping cream and all of those sorts of things, but that can really also be done with the hand whisk that I talked about with the electric hand whisk that I talked about in part 1. Okay, so unless you're not worried about spending the money on something like this, then you can then they're a great piece of kit to have, but don't feel you have to rush out and buy one just for the sake of it. Another useful feature about these mixers is that they come with a whole host of attachments. Okay, and the one I use the most actually is this little pasta machine here. Okay, it clips on the top like the front, and it means that you don't have to do it by hand. But to be fair, for 15 or 20 or 30 euros you can buy a hand pasta machine, and they do a great job as well. It just depends on how much you're going to use them. I'd start with the small stuff and then kind of move on as I find I'm doing something a lot. Now the last thing I'll talk about is an ice cream machine. Okay, and now there's several different kinds of ice cream machines. The first one costs around kind of 50 euros. It's got a bowl that goes in the freezer for 24 hours. It gets really cold, and then you pour the filling in, and it's got a small motor and a paddle that clips on the top. Okay, and basically the cold transfers from the bowl into the ice cream as it churns, and it freezes. However, you can only ever make one batch at a time before you have to refreeze the bowl, and if the mix isn't quite frozen enough by the time the bowl's warmed up, it never really works out. So personally, I'm not massively very keen on those cheaper ones. The other style of machine starts from 100 euros and goes right up to thousands depending on the size, and it's one like this. I think this was 150 or 200 euros. It's got an actual freezer compressor in it. Okay, so it freezes the thin bowl as it turns the paddle. Okay, like this as well. And you can make batch after batch after batch of ice cream with these. Take about half an hour, and it'll just keep churning it out every day. So this is where I'd be spending my money if I was going to buy an ice cream machine. Okay. If I didn't have a cookery school, I probably wouldn't have one of these at home, I think, because I don't make that much ice cream. Now there's another method for making ice cream without having to invest in this machine. If you're interested in making ice cream, I really suggest you go and have a look at that video, because if you try a few of the recipes, you might find that actually you don't need the big machine, and it might save you a couple £100 and half a square meter of bench space. So that's a general roundup. Remember, we've got a list of equipment on our website if you want to have a look at the things that we recommend and the things that we use in our kitchen. Or if you have any questions, then drop them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I see them. Thanks for watching. See you soon.